Hi, this is Tamara at mooglyblog.com, and in this video, I'm going to be demonstrating how to crochet the Moroccan Tile Rectangle for Warm Up America. This is a free pattern you'll find on mooglyblog.com, and as I just said, this pattern was designed specifically to work for donation to Warm Up America. Warm Up America is a national nonprofit that provides hand-knitted and crocheted blankets, clothing, and accessories made by volunteers. They have donated over 1.5 million blankets and clothing to people in need, and one of the main things they do is collect these 7-inch by 9-inch rectangles that are then assembled by more volunteers into blankets. This year, I've been able to design one of those rectangles. To make the Moroccan Tile Rectangle, I used 2 colors of Caron Simply Soft and a USH 5mm crochet hook. I also recommend that you have some stitch markers available when you make this pattern. Let's get started. Here you can see a little closer the Moroccan Tile Rectangle. This rectangle is made from the bottom up, and as you can see, we're using 2 colors of yarn. We are using a special system here, also known as poulade or pull-up loop and drop, or 2 active loops. So it's really important that you do have those stitch markers ready because we'll have 2 active loops, a blue loop and a white loop going the whole time that we're making this pattern. Of course, you can use whichever colors you like. So, starting with our slip knot on the hook, we begin with color A, our first color, and chain 25. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll see you when we get to 25. All right, after we've chained 25, we're going to work a double crochet in the 5th chain from the hook, which will count as a double crochet and a skipped chain. So let's go ahead and yarn over, and then we're going to count in 5 chains here. I like to work into the underneath hump of the chain, especially with a project like this. I'm not working a border around this rectangle, and working to the back hump leaves these 2 lumps as the finished edge, which is a little easier for the person who wants to come along and sew these rectangles together. So once again, I've got my yarn over, and we'll count in 5 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Insert my hook and put a double crochet right there. Now, as I just mentioned, that those skipped 4 chains are going to count as a double crochet and a skipped chain down here. So what we want to do is actually take our stitch marker and put it not in the top of the double crochet we just made, but in the chain right next to it, because that chain right next to it will actually count as the top of our first stitch. So I just put my stitch marker right under those top 2 loops of that chain right there. And now you can see we've already got a couple of stitches made. So I'm going to reinsert my hook, go back to our instructions, and now what we do is chain 1 and double crochet in the same chain, that same one we worked in before. This creates our first V-stitch. A V-stitch for this pattern is double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, all worked into the same stitch or the same space. Sometimes we fudge that a little bit on the ends to make the ends work, but the ends are always a little funky when it comes to stitch patterns anyway. So with that V-stitch made, we go back to our instructions, and now we begin the section that starts with the asterisk, our stitch repeat for row 1. We skip the next 2 chains and then work a double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, that's the V-stitch, in the next stitch. So let's yarn over, so we're all ready to go. Skip the next 2 chains, 1, 2, go to the chain after that, and right in there, we're going to work our double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet again. There we go. Then we are going to begin that whole sequence again. It's a very simple repeat that takes us all the way across until we get to the last 2 chains. So that repeat again is skip 2 chains, 1, 2, and then V-stitch in the next stitch. So once again, let's get under just that loop there. We've got a double crochet. There we go. Chain 1 and double crochet right back in that same stitch. Then we do the repeat again. Skip the next 2 stitches, go to the next stitch, and do another double crochet, chain 1, there we go, and double crochet. We continue that all the way across until there are just 2 chains left. Now you can see I've worked all the way across and there are just 2 chains left. What we're going to do now is we're going to skip the next chain and simply double crochet in the very last chain. That will mirror sort of how we began our row when we skipped all those stitches. So after I finish that last double crochet right there in our last stitch, what I'm going to do is pull up the loop and put a stitch marker in it. Then I'm just going to let it drop and put this down. When you're following this pattern, you want to make sure to read your instructions because we don't turn at the end of every row, just every other row. At the end of row 1, we do not turn. We just put it down and bring up our second yarn to begin row 2. Alrighty, so I've brought in my purple background so it's a little easier to see row 2 here since it is made in this white yarn, or again, whatever color you happen to use. To begin this one, we're going to go ahead and let's put another slip knot on our hook here. There we go. Of course, I always leave enough to weave in my end properly. So with our slip knot on our hook, what we're going to do is a standing double crochet in the chain space of the first V-stitch of the previous row. A lot of words, but it's not too hard. Let's go ahead and do it. What we're going to do is you can see I'm holding on to the tail end of my yarn here so that that loop doesn't move around on my hook. So then I can yarn over and pick up row 1 here. Now that's a double crochet that we've got marked right there. Remember that very first, that chain that we skipped right there? So then we have that first V-stitch. We've got a double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. We want to go right into that chain 1 space. So we're gonna go right in there with our hook. Notice I'm still holding onto that tail so that I've got control of the yarn that's on my hook. Now I'm going to yarn over, pull that loop up through the space, and at this point, I always like to scooch those loops a little closer to each other on the hook so that my stitch doesn't end up becoming really tall. Then I'll yarn over and pull through that loop and carefully behind that yarn over. Notice I'm still holding onto that tail end. Then I yarn over and pull through that loop and through the loop with the slip knot. Then I can drop that end. And we've made a double crochet directly into that chain space. So I'm going to scooch that over just a little bit because now I want to chain 1 and double crochet in that same chain space again, making another V-stitch right into that V-stitch. There we are. I do like to hold on to that tail sometimes just to help control things, but it is steadily in there now. So now we've got our V-stitch worked into the first V-stitch of row 1. Then we are going to work our repeat, which is double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, those V-stitches in the chain space of each V-stitch across. So we want to read our previous row. We look over here. See, there's that next V. There's that chain space in between. We go right in there. I've already got my yarn over on my hook. Oop. There we go. So I double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet. Note that we are not chaining 1 in between the V-stitches. We just go right to the next V-stitch and do it again. Double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. Go to the next one, find that chain 1 space, double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet. And you continue that all the way across. Alrighty, so here I've come to the end of row 2. You can see I've got that V-stitch worked into that V-stitch, and that final double crochet is just hanging out there on the end. I am now done with row 2. So once again, I want to pull up that loop, grab a stitch marker, and secure that loop with a stitch marker. Then, after row 2, I'm going to turn my work to work back the other direction. Okay, so now that we've turned, we're ready to go back and work with our first color, color A again. So I'm going to carefully pick up my work, and I'm going to let all of color B fall to the back and make sure that color A here is free to work with. Then I can go ahead and take that stitch marker out and set it aside so I can use it again and replace my hook in that loop. There we go. Pull that down. Make sure your hook is in that loop the correct way, of course. The part that moves should be in front of the hook. There we go. And now we're all set up, once my fingers want to cooperate here, to begin row 3. So for row 3, we're going to start by making a chainless starting double crochet in the first stitch, and that's the first stitch of row 1. So What we're going to do is we're going to, let me get that yarn out of the way here so it's a little easier to see. I am going to move our purple background out of the way since we're working with the blue, and I'm going to pull my loop up to about the height of a double crochet. I'll secure the top of that loop with my finger, yarn over with the loop itself, and go right into that first stitch. Then I'm going to yarn over, pull that loop up and through, yarn over, pull that loop through that loop and behind the yarn over. Then I'll finally release the top of that loop, yarn over, and pull through those 2 loops right there. And then I can go ahead and secure the top of that stitch with a stitch marker. So in total, you want to have at least 4 stitch markers available as you are working this pattern. You could probably get away with 3, but it'll be a little bit easier if you've got 4. There we go. So with that stitch made, we then chain 1, and now we're going to double crochet between the first and second stitch of row 1. That's between the double crochet and the first V-stitch. So look closely at our stitches here. We're going to yarn over. We're going to go right in there. Remember, there's the double crochet, and there was that first V-stitch. I'm going to go right in that space. It's not a chain 1 space. There wasn't a chain 1 there, but we can put our hook there so we can make a stitch there. That's the joy of crochet. Anywhere we can put our hook, we can put a stitch. So right there, we've now made, it'll be our first V-stitch here for row 3. Now, our repeat that's going to take us the rest of the way across the row is making more V-stitches, that double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, but now we're going to be working between the V-stitches of color A, row 1, enclosing row 2. Sounds like a lot, but don't worry, we're going to do it together. So what we're going to do is we right away yarn over, so we know we're going to be making a double crochet, and we look at our work. You can see here is that V-stitch with the V-stitch worked into it. We want to come down here and go right between those 2 V-stitches. And you can see I'm going to send my yarn right over row 2. I'm going to enclose it. I'm not working in front of or behind it. I'm working right over it. So then I can just finish my double crochet. A little bit more of my blue yarn there. There we go. And can you see now how row 2 is completely trapped in there? So then I just chain 1 and double crochet right in that same space. You want to keep the bottom of that double crochet a little loose. We don't want to overly squish our row 2, but it does get squished a little bit, and that's okay. Then we just jump over that set of V-stitches and go right between the next 2. You can kind of see the V and V there. We want to go right between them. Double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. Right there. So you can see it's already starting to kind of get that dotted look a little bit. We just continue that all the way across, and I'll meet you when we get to the end here of row 3. Okay, so here you can see we're almost at the end of row 3. I've got this one set of V-stitches left here remaining. So now what I'm going to do is jump on over here to the end, and I'm going to put a double crochet in between this last V-stitch and that final double crochet. So if you'd like, you can kind of trap that end there if you want to, but you don't need to. It's just optional. If you like holding it down right there, you can weave that end in when you go to weave in the rest of your ends. With that double crochet made, we then chain 1, and then put a double crochet right in the top of that chain. That's why we had that chain marked. We finally came back to it now. We put our double crochet right in there. And now we can take that stitch marker, pull up this loop, and secure it with that stitch marker right there. And at the end of row 3, we are not going to turn our work. So for row 4, we're going back to our white color, so I've pulled back in our purple background. You can see that white loop is now right where I need it, waiting for me. So what I'm going to do is pick up my work here, and before I put that loop back on my hook, I'm going to go ahead and take the stitch marker out of the way for the moment. I want to make sure I don't lose it there. Hold on to that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert my hook into the chain space of the first V-stitch of color A. So that would be this one right here. Yes, one of the double crochets is worked in that space and the other is worked in the last stitch, but that gives us this really nice edge. So we go right into that chain 1 space right there, that first chain 1 space. And then we go ahead and drop that loop back on top of our hook. There we go. Then I can pull that loop to the front of our work, just like this. After that, I'm going to do another one of those chainless starting double crochets. So I'm going to pull my loop up to the height of a double crochet, and I'm going to be working into that same chain one space right here. So what I like to do at this point is actually sort of pull my fabric aside and create some space for myself right there using my other fingers. So then with that loop pulled up, I'm going to secure the top of the loop with that finger, yarn over with the loop itself, go right into that chain one space, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through that loop and behind the yarn over, and then pull through those last two loops. If you don't like this stitch, you can substitute a chain three or your favorite double crochet substitute, whatever you like to use when you are making double crochet rows. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and put my stitch marker right in the top of that stitch and replace my hook. And then I chain one and double crochet in that same chain one space again. So again, you can sort of pull on the fabric and create that space for yourself if needed. There we are. So now we've got that first one made, and now we're going to continue making those V-stitches again, all the way across, working in the chain space of each V-stitch of the previous row. So when we're working our blue stitches or our color A stitches, we're working into those color A spaces, and when we're working our color B stitches, we're also working into color A spaces. So now we jump over here to this V-stitch and go right into that chain one. So when we're working with our color B, we want to be stacking those V stitches. When we're working with our color A, that's when we're offsetting them. That may make more sense here as we continue through the pattern. So for now, I'm just making those V stitches again. Like I say, going right into the chain one spaces of the previous row. So I'll see you as we get to the end here of row 4. Alrighty, and here I am at the end of row 4, and you can see I worked all the way across, including in that very last V-stitch right there. So with that, I can pull up that loop and secure it with another stitch marker. And since we finished an even number row, we go ahead and turn our work to begin row 5. So for row 5, we're going back to our color A. So we want to go ahead and find our color A loop and let color B just fall right to the back. Get that stitch marker on out of there and get our loop back on our hook. There we go. So to begin row 5, we start with another chainless starting double crochet in that first stitch. So we pull up the height of our loop again here, secure the top, yarn over, and go right into that first stitch. Again, if you'd prefer, you can use a chain 3 or whatever double crochet substitute you prefer. I'm going to mark the top of that stitch right there that I just made. So you can mark the third chain if you're using a chain 3. Get that in there a little bit nicer. There we go. And with that made, then we are going to leave that double crochet on its own. This one isn't going to be part of a V-stitch. We're now going to begin our V-stitches working back between the V-stitches of color A all the way across and closing color B just like we did last time. So let's straighten everything out here and take a look at our work. We see here's a V-stitch right there, worked into that V-stitch. So this would be the space between those V-stitches. Hopefully a little easier to see now. So now we're going to be stacking on top of this one. You see how that V-stitch is right there? So we just want to yarn over and go right down there between the V-stitches of that same color A. So remember, these are the loops we want to pull up a little bit higher when we make these double crochets. Chain 1 and double crochet right in that same space. It can be a little jumbly here as you get started. You can take some time, straighten that out, pull your stitches out nicely, and there you go. You can see what we're doing a little easier. So now we do it again. Jump over here, find those 2 V-stitches, go right in between, and do it again. Double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet. Let's drop that whole loop. Let's do that again. There we go. And let's do one more of these together. We're going to come over here. There's a set of V-stitches. We're going to go right between them. Pull up that first loop a little bit higher, double crochet, chain 1. Same thing on this one. Pull it up just a little bit higher, and we continue that all the way across. So now I'm almost at the end here of row 5. Now, I put a stitch marker in the top of this white stitch just because it's habit, but I don't actually need that. We're not going to be working back into that stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and take that one on out. What I want to do to finish up row 5 is make a double crochet down here into this marked stitch. Again, when we're working with color A, we're only working into color A stitches. So we go right down on there and make our double crochet, and that will balance out here what we had at the beginning of the row. So we can get this stitch marker on out here since we already worked into that stitch, but we can put it to use right away by pulling up that loop and securing it. Remember, after we make an odd numbered row, we do not turn because we're all set up to pick up the previous color to make, whoops, there we go, to make row 6. So since we're going back into our white loop here, we have a similar thing where we want to, before we insert our hook back into that color, we need to find where we're going to insert it in the previous row. So we want to come back here to row 5 and take a closer look. What we're going to be doing is inserting our hook into the chain 1 space of the first V-stitch. Now remember, this is a double crochet all on its own. So we're going to come all the way over here, sort of in between the two color B V-stitches back here. We want to go into this first V-stitch right here. Then we're going to come back here. I'm actually going to get my stitch marker out of the way here. There we go. And with my hook in that chain 1 space, then we can go ahead and drop our active loop back on our hook and pull it on through to the front, just like we did when we did the previous color B row here. So we've got that in there. So now we're going to go ahead and pull that up, make our chainless starting double crochet again, yarn over, go into that chain 1 space, yarn over, pull up our loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Of course, my instinct is to mark the top of this stitch, but we don't need to. We know we're not going to work back into that stitch. So we can just chain 1 and double crochet right back in that chain 1 space right there. And then, of course, since it's a color B row, that's what we do all the way across. Find the next V stitch there, that next chain 1 space, and put another V stitch right in there. Double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. And we continue that all the way across for row 6. All right, so here I am at the end of row 6. I've worked a V-stitch into each V-stitch of the previous row, and just like we began in a little bit, this time we're going to end in a little bit from the sort of end of that row. So as long as you've worked into each V-stitch, you know you've worked enough across. There should be a total of 7 V-stitches here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we go ahead and put our stitch marker in to secure that end, and now we're ready to turn. For row 7, we're going back to color A. So we'll get that stitch marker on out of our loop and replace that loop on our hook. I always like to just take a moment and make sure I'm putting that loop on the right way. There we go. All right, now we're all set. So we're just going to, again, let that color B row fall to the back out of the way for now. And we're just going to start by putting a double crochet right in that first stitch. So again, chain 3 or use whichever method you prefer for the first double crochet of a row. I will go ahead and put my stitch marker in the top of that stitch. It's blue. It's my color A, so I know I'm going to come back and work into it eventually. And replace the loop on the hook. Alrighty, so let's go to our instructions again here to continue on across for row 7, which we are in right now. We chain 1, and then we double crochet in between that first double crochet and the V-stitch. Kind of like what we were doing back there. It might look familiar. We go right in that space right there. There we go. So now that's going to be the first V-stitch of that row. Now we continue on across just like we've been doing. Let's go ahead and pull those white stitches sort of out of the way here, so we make sure we don't trap them too much. We only trap the parts we want to. Find those V-stitches. There's 1, there's 2. We go right in between again. Pull that loop up a little higher. Double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. At this point, I think, you probably understand how this stitch pattern works. It's just getting the ends of the rows sort of straightened out so that you get really nice edges to your rectangle. But it's just like we were doing before. V-stitches in between the V-stitches, enclosing the previous row. So continue on across here, and I'll see you as we get to the end of row 8. So now I'm most of the way across for row 7. We've come to this last little bit right here. So to finish up this row, you can see some of our V actually gets covered up here by this color B stitch right here, but that's okay. We know it's there. We're still going to go in between that V stitch and this double crochet stitch for a double crochet, chain 1, and then finish that V stitch by going into the last stitch of the previous row here to give us our nice straight side. There we go. And of course, we need to pull up our loop here, move that stitch marker on up so it's secured. And since it's an odd numbered row, we do not turn as we get ready to make row 8. Row 8 is another color B row, so we know we begin by inserting our hook into the previous row before we put the loop back on our hook. So we look for that first V stitch of the previous row. It's right there. So we're going to go right into that chain 1 space and find our loop. Again, I forgot to take off the stitch marker first. You might want to do that before you put your hook in there. There we go. And then we can drop that active loop right back on our hook and pull it down. We pull that loop to the front of our fabric, and now we're ready to begin stitching. We start again with that double crochet substitute, whatever kind you like to make. I'm going to get some room for myself in there, right there next to the stitch. Pull my loop up, yarn over, insert my hook, yarn over and pull up my loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 2. Then of course, chain 1 and double crochet right into that same chain 1 space. There we go. And then, just like every other color B row, we make those V stitches in each V stitch across. So we find the next one right here, go right into that chain 1 space, double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. Nothing you haven't seen before in this video. Find the next V stitch and put a V stitch right in there. So we continue that on across just as before until we've finished row 8. So here I've finished row 8. You can see I put a V stitch in each V stitch across, including that very last one, and I went ahead and secured the loop with a stitch marker. So from here, I would be able to turn my work and continue on in pattern. We've already made all the pattern rows except for the very last one. Our repeat is rows 5 through 8. Continuing on, and for this particular size of rectangle for Warm Up America, you'll want to go for 26 rows. You can see again what that looks like on the full-sized one here. You can see we've already established our stitch pattern, and we just continue that on through. We continue repeating rows 5 through 8. We want to end on a row 6 repeat. So that would be back here. Row 6 is one of the color B rows right there. So that sort of repeat is the one you want to end on. And then we go to our final row, row 27. So after you've worked through row 26, again, it will be a row 6 repeat. So one of the rows that looks like this. This is an actual row 6. So after row 6, we can go ahead and break our color B yarn. So that means you can go ahead and cut it and finish it off. To finish it off, I simply like to pull that end right through the active loop. Then we can turn our work and we're ready for row 27. So now let's make row 27. I've replaced my hook in my color A loop here because of course we cut off color B. So I'm just going to let that fall to the back just as I've been doing. And first we're going to put our chainless starting double crochet or double crochet substitute right in that first stitch. So I'll pull up my loop and put a double crochet right in there. I'm not going to go bother marking this stitch. It's our final row, so I won't be working back into it. Then I am going to double crochet between the first and second stitch of the previous color A row. So that's our double crochet and our V stitch. We go right in there. Now I did not chain 1 in between those. We just put a double crochet right in there. This is our final row, so it's just a little bit different. Then we're going to go back to doing what we were doing before, and we're going to work V stitches between the V stitches of color A until one V stitch remains. So we know what that looks like. We come back over here, find those V stitches, drop all the way down there, and put another V stitch in there. This is our final row, so we want to make sure to work at nice and evenly. So we continue that on across until we get to the end, just as we were doing before. All right, so I'm almost done with row 27. You can see I've got my V stitches worked, and we're right here at the end. So to finish off this row, we want to sort of, again, duplicate what we had at the beginning. So we start by double crocheting between that last V-stitch and that last double crochet. Again, it's a little covered up right there, but we know it's back there. So we put one double crochet right there, and then we just immediately double crochet in that very last stitch, like so. Then we can go ahead and break this end of our yarn and weave in all 4 ends. Weaving in your ends is really important before you send in your block to Warm Up America. You also may want to block your rectangle. To block this one, I used just a little bit of water and I pinned it out so that measured exactly 7 inches by 9 inches. After your ends are woven in and it's to the right size, you'll be all ready to send it in. And that's how to crochet the Moroccan Tile Rectangle, perfect for donation to Warm Up America or creating your own beautiful blanket. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.